This video is to introduce you to the similarities and differences between Illustrator and InDesign, and briefly talk about the tools that are different in Illustrator. Once you open Illustrator, as with InDesign, you can go to File, Open New Document. We'll make this a letter document. You can change your increments here. You can add a bleed if you need to. Also, Advanced will allow you to change between print and web or medium resolution. For our example, we'll keep it on CMYK and high, which is 300 ppi. You could actually give it a name, and you can also give it more than one artboard. I'm not sure if there's an upper limit. I've never found one. Also, it has a directional. If you have more than one artboard, you can have like a flow direction as to how they're numbered, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. I'll leave it as one artboard. Say OK. The toolbar, the first two tools are exactly the same as in InDesign, selection and direct select. This selects a bounding box around a shape. The direct select allows you to manipulate individual points. The magic wand and the lasso tools let you grab hold of parts of the path or an entire shape. Again, they work much like the tools above them, so I rarely use these in Illustrator. The pen tool, which has other options beneath it, works just like the pen tool in InDesign. The type tool, you have several options, not just the type on a path. You have area type tool, vertical type tool, vertical area type tool, and vertical type on a path tool. So whereas this can wrap around the path kind of in a rainbow fashion, this will put the type around the path vertically. This will run it up and down in the area of the path. This will also run the type vertically around the path. The line tool will allow you to draw any shape line. Again, if you hold the Shift key down, you get 90, 45, and 0 degrees on your line. And it should default to black for your stroke. And then, of course, there are other tools. There's an arc tool, a spiral tool, rectangular grid, or polar grid tools. Those, just play around with those on your own and just see what you like. Most of these, if you double-click them or click and release, it will give you a dialog box to change the parameters. Oh, and with the type tool, I didn't mention, you can click and release, and you get an insertion point for your type. Or if you go to the type tool and do click, hold, drag, you can create a text box as you do in InDesign. This will allow your copy to flow within the box, whereas just clicking and releasing your type, you have to hit the return key in order to keep the type from running off the page. Basically, the polygon tools work as basically as they do in InDesign. You don't have a frame tool per se, where you have a frame and then you place a picture inside of it. What you have here is you have the place tool, or the place command under File, and we'll go over to, let's see, the C drive, and let's see if we have a graphic maybe in here. Yes, let's just do our business card graphic. It comes in with its own bounding box, but if you want to put it inside of a circular box, you can click, hold, drag, create a circle, and of course it has black on it. Using the selection tool, grab both the ellipse you just drew that's in black and the picture, and then we'll go to Object, Clipping Mask, Make. And now notice it converted the black circle to a frame in a way. It's easier to do a lot of this in InDesign. So this is the difference here between Illustrator and InDesign, is we call it masking. And if you ever want to unmask, you simply go to Object, Clipping Mask, Release. And now you have your circle and your picture. They did the flare tool, creates kind of a photographic effect. You can play around with that. Once you've drawn some shapes and added color, you can use the flare tool to make kind of a photographic effect. You have a paintbrush, which we really won't use here. We have the pencil, smoothing tool, and erase path eraser tool. So if we draw a path, and we'll give the stroke a black fill, then we can use the smooth tool to kind of straighten out that path. See how it was a little bit too angular? By drawing across the path, we can give it a much softer appearance and make it more serpentine. And of course, let me go back and show you the Erase Path tool. You can just select the path and then erase part of it. And now you have two separate segments. The blob brush tool, we will actually use that in our next assignment. Now what this does is it allows you to paint in an area, almost like a crayon on a coloring book, will allow you to fill in an area. But instead of having multiple paths that overlap one another, let's go to Outline. Notice how as I paint over the existing path with the same color, it will actually remove any overlaps. So we get this rather odd looking shape, but it is all filled with black, and it's much easier and less memory for an Illustrator to do it this way. You can also erase the path. Let's select that, and we can just draw the eraser across it, or maybe just subtly we want to remove part of the edge. That will come in handy for the next exercise. Scissor tool, you can click right on a point, which will actually cut the path apart. And let's go to the direct select. Notice how we have separate paths that can be deleted, and we leave that one. These are not closed paths, but they still fill with the black even though they're not closed. And you also have a knife tool. Now this will allow you to cut across a shape. And so instead of that one separate shape, we now have two, where we use the knife. We have the Rotate and Reflect tool. Rotate allows you to just spin the object. Reflect allows it to kind of mirror image it. We have the Scale tool, the Shear tool, and then one I rarely use is the Reshape tool. To me, it's easier to use the Direct Select for that. Now here we have a lot of different tools. The Width tool, again, I rarely use the Width tool in this. It allows you to keep the width similar, but a certain amount of space between things. You can use the Warp tool. Allows you to distort from side or inside an object. Twirl tool, this is a lot of fun. A lot of first-time students like to do that. If you double-click the tool, you can change the direction from the twirl rate from positive percent to negative, positive degrees to negative degrees. And now instead of counterclockwise, it spins clockwise. And you can actually just click and hold, and it will spin rather infinitely. Pucker tool allows things to be pulled in to a single point. The Bloat tool allows you to expand things from a center point. It gives a rather unusual effect. Scallop tool, and these tools actually, their icons show pretty much what they do. The Crystallize, and then the Wrinkle tool. Wrinkle tool is good for like turning type into kind of scary letters. Like here we go, type the word scary, and with the type, usually have that in your control panel, much as you do in design. Let's go here and let's convert the type to outlines or create outlines, and go to that Wrinkle tool. Let's zoom in a little bit. Now scary looks scary. So those are some tools to play around with on your own. This Free Transform tool, again, I rarely use that. It's just as easy to go to the selection arrow and reshape. It does do some things pretty well. These two, I rarely use them. Only occasionally I've used the Perspective Grid tool, and it's a very useful tool for doing architectural renderings, building plans, things like that. I do use these very often, the Mesh tool and the Gradient tool. Gradient tool works as it did in InDesign, but let's just show you what the Mesh tool will do. Let's draw a shape, and let's go to the Fill selector, and let's fill it with a red color. So it'll be mostly magenta and yellow with a little cyan. Now, the Mesh tool, you can actually create a mesh under Object. Where is that? There it is, create gradient mesh. Sometimes they move these tools around. You can create it here and simply tell it how many rows and columns. Let's do 5 and 5. And notice how it added it in there. Or you can do it with the tool. You can just simply click, and be sure to click right on the line, and then you can add them across. Now, using the direct select, again that's the light arrow, you can change the color of each individual point. And this will then allow you to manipulate the color. You can actually create an image that looks rather photographic. If you would create an apple outline, let's say, or an orange outline, and then fill it with different shades of orange or red, depending on if it's an apple, you could actually create something that looks very much like a photograph of an apple. And again, you select any point, even points on the edge you can select. Like right here, you could, let's just say, fill it with white, like the light is coming from above. Same thing here. And notice how that the top looks like there's a glare above it. So again, that's great. Now, if you wanted to create just a regular gradient, let's get rid of that shape, and just draw an ellipse and fill it with a gradient, just as you did with InDesign. Go to Radial, and you can use the gradient tool to relocate the center of the radial fill, or the direction, and change the direction of the linear fill. I'm going to go quickly now because really there are not many more tools that we'll deal with. The eyedropper, you can select a color. The blend tool is a great tool. Let's say we have two different shapes. We can also have shapes with different colors as well, but let's click on these two. Go to the blend tool, and let's click on similar positioned points. Notice how it just did one blend. If we double click that tool, we can specify steps, and let's do 20. Now notice how that worked. Now if the two shapes were the other orientation, where this one was behind this one, we could change that around. Let's do the small one. Okay, let's send the big one now to the back. Arrange, send to back. Get your blend tool, click, and click. Now notice how the top shape goes to the bottom shape. We have a symbol sprayer where you can choose symbols and spray them. You can create graphs. Again, I rarely use graph tool. It's useful for its purpose, but I rarely use it. That's something that you may want to research yourself. This is the artboard tool. Now, this allows you to go into the artboard selector, excuse me, and you can start drawing a new artboard. Click on the upper right point because I don't want it to cross this artboard, and I can do 8.5 by 11. Now notice how I now have two artboards. It says artboard 2. Click on the selection arrow and notice how that there are two letter-sized boards side by side. And that allows you to change that. Of course, we have the slice tool and the slice selection tool. Rarely do I use that. That's for web production, and I tend to do most of my web graphics as one unit here, and then I export them to Photoshop. And then ultimately you have the hand tool, which moves your artboards around, and then your zoom tool, which command plus and minus work. Much better at that. Your fill and stroke selector are exactly as they are in InDesign. And then of course the solid color, gradient, or none for either the stroke or the fill. And I know this was a very quick primer on Illustrator, but I want to encourage you just to get into Illustrator, open a new document, and play around with the tools. Start with the ones that look like InDesign, and then go on to the ones that are not as familiar to you. And good luck.